But we begin overseas with NBC's Kelly Kobiela in Edinburgh, NBC senior international correspondent Keir Simmons in London, British historian Andrew Roberts, and Gillian Tett, chair of the Financial Times editorial board, and NBC royal commentator Daisy McAndrew. So, Kelly, the Queen's casket departing St. Giles earlier than expected today. Tell us about the reception there as the coffin left for the very last time after an extraordinary night, an outpouring of people, Scottish people, at night in chilly weather, lining up to pay their last respects.
Yeah, there were tens of thousands waiting in that long line overnight, some waiting up to 5 hours or more, hoping to pay their final respects to the Queen inside St. Giles Cathedral overnight. At about 1 o'clock this afternoon, the Scottish government said, I'm sorry, no more people can stand in line. We're hoping to get the rest of the public in by 3 p.m., at which point they stopped all viewings. They had cleared the cathedral and started making the preparations for the Queen's casket to be moved. We saw Princess Anne arrive just after 4 o'clock. She went inside. There was some private prayer time for the family, while outside, all of these thousands of people who desperately wanted to see the Queen off here in Scotland lined the streets once again. They were shoulder to shoulder behind these barricades, not just here in Edinburgh, close to the cathedral, where of course, the streets are quite narrow, but all along that route, and you can see it as the Queen's coffin is taken to the airport. Anywhere they could find a space, people are lined there. Here in Edinburgh, in the city centre, there was a quiet, somber applause as her coffin passed by for the last time, leaving this historic city for the very last time. And again, you saw that same kind of quiet, somber tribute as she continued that journey. And Andrea, something that we've seen over the past 3 days when we were in Balmoral, there was a small group there to send her off, just really people who felt like they were her neighbors. Princess Anne, of course, in that cortege with her as she made that 6-hour journey down here to Edinburgh on Sunday. And we saw people crammed onto highway overpasses. Every single overpass we went by, people were waiting to see her, waiting to pay their respects, even from afar. It's been quite an emotional several days here in Edinburgh, and we've talked to people from all over this country and also people who have come from much farther afield. There was a grandmother, a 96-year-old woman from Uganda, who was here visiting her family, and she had difficulty walking, but she insisted on going to the castle in Balmoral, walking up to those gates and laying flowers for a woman who was her same age, who she remembers, who brought back memories of her long lifetime as well. Lots of people telling us not only is this a historic moment that they wanted to mark with their children, but also a moment when they wanted to just take some time and pay respects to this extraordinary woman who lived an extraordinary life. Andrea?
And as you were describing that, we just saw the picture. There's a little boy, a little red-headed boy. He shakes hand with the Queen Consort, and he holds up his hands. He's so excited in the upper box on the screen as we look also at the aerials of the motorcade, the cortege going towards the airport. Just the excitement, and then, of course, the beauty of the coffin being escorted down from St. Giles Cathedral, draped in the standard, the Scottish standard, and while it was at rest there in this vigil overnight with her children around her so memorably with the flowers and that 500-year-old Scottish crown. Keir, talk to us about all of the symbolic and the personal tributes that we've been watching for the last few days.
Well, Andrea, it is the great pageantry that surrounds the passing of a great monarch, isn't it? And that is what we have been seeing and what we will see from here outside Buckingham Palace and here in London when the Queen arrives here. We are watching a final farewell to Scotland in a week of final farewells. But honestly, I suspect that for the Queen herself, this would be the most poignant goodbye, because Scotland was the country that she loved the most. And these are her last minutes there as she heads to Edinburgh airport and then for that hour flight here to London. And when she gets here to London, she will come here to Buckingham Palace. And again, final farewells. This will be her last night at Buckingham Palace. She'll be met here by the royal family, including King Charles, and she will be brought from here in a ceremony that goes back in history. Her father, King George, was taken through the streets of London in a similar ceremony with members of the royal family walking behind the coffin. All of that we have seen in Scotland, and she, wherever she is, will be so delighted, frankly, that there was the opportunity to say goodbye to Scotland. And I suppose you could say, well, they're them paying their respects to her paying her respects to them. She would have been delighted that that was possible because of the fact that she ultimately spent her last days at Balmoral. So it's going to be days of tears and of celebration and of the British Constitution celebrating its head of state. And then next week, that funeral. And Kelly was talking about people lining the streets, and that they are there, as you can see, in Scotland, and they are here too outside Buckingham Palace. It's just extraordinary, isn't it, to see people standing alongside the streets here, this famous Mall, waiting for the Queen to arrive when we're watching these pictures of her still in Scotland. But people are that determined to give some time to a Queen who gave them almost all her time, her life. That they are that determined to have the opportunity to say goodbye because, of course, and we've seen the streets, and the new king will be pleased with this. We've seen the streets lined and full of crowds for the king. But the crowds that are coming to see the Queen know that they will never be able to do that again. It is their last chance.
And as we see the motorcade beginning to pull up on the tarmac and approaching the plane, one of the things, Keir, that you've been pointing out is that the flowers on her coffin were among the beautiful flowers from Balmoral that she loved from her gardens there. The poignant touches from Balmoral, one of the castles that is family-owned, not owned by the state, as Buckingham and Windsor are. And it was so personal to her, and it was her connection to Queen Victoria was very important to her. Her ancestor, of course, and another of the long-serving monarchs, but not reaching that 70-year-plus triumph of this Queen Elizabeth II. One of the things that occurs, Daisy, as we're watching, and we'll be watching the coffin being loaded on the plane, is whether, as we see all of these pictures of Camilla and, of course, Charles, but Camilla notably shaking hands, reaching into the crowds. We in the States are not used to seeing those pictures of Camilla engaged in that kind of what we would call retail politics. I know it's not politics when it's a sovereign, but if you understand the connection there, of course, is Princess Anne. I just want to point out the sole daughter of the children, and she was with the Queen throughout, and she will be riding with her on the plane. She has been at the Queen's request, according to all the reporting, that she has been with her and at her side through life and now in death. Daisy, we see a big transformation in terms of the public acceptance in the UK of Camilla from the days when we in the States, of course, were also enthralled, as were many Britons, in those early romantic days with Princess Diana.
You're absolutely right, Andrea. It's been quite a transformation for Camilla. Of course, it has been a long, slow process, and I think that was very deliberate on her behalf. She didn't want to be thrust into the limelight. She wanted to take her time, and that's exactly what she has done. But of course, now there's no escaping that limelight. She is now the Queen Consort. But as you were saying, we are now looking at those pictures of the Queen about to be taken out of the hearse, taken onto that RAF plane and taken for her last flight from Scotland to England. I'm led to believe that her call sign on that RAF plane is Kitty Hawk, and I think that's the last time that call sign will be used by the RAF.
And with us also Gillian Tett, King Charles is going to need to make this transition, provide a calming, a sympathetic voice to the people. He doesn't have the popularity, of course, nearly the popularity of his mother, but he's been making that transition as well and has done so many royal duties in preparation, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of these appearances, as well as his private and public charities. But now he is vowed, certainly, and signaled that he's passing those charities on to his heir, Prince William, and to his other children. And he is going to be taking a much less publicly political role.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the fascinating things about the Queen was that she became extraordinarily popular and created a sense of gravitas because she didn't really say very much on anything that was too controversial. She took great care to be quiet on politics or any global affairs that were too, too loaded. And Prince Charles, of course, has become quite famous or infamous for weighing in on all kinds of things over the years, whether that's the state of modern architecture and saying how much he hates many modern buildings, to embracing causes that used to be unfashionable, which of course are now mainstream, like environmentalism. He really was one of the first voices to stand up loudly and talk about the need to be green. And his name is on a number of green initiatives. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether once he actually is, well, now that he is king, not once he is, now that he's king, whether he will actually be able to follow his mother and keep entirely quiet. And it'll also be interesting to see whether he can actually use this extraordinary outburst of energy and emotion around the Queen's funeral to actually trying to forge a new identity for Britain at a time when, frankly, Britain's place in the world, its economic situation, its standing more generally, is pretty troubled.